I had all these assumptions about who a Trump voter was. I thought they were uneducated, sort of were, mostly in rural places. I had all these sort of stereotypes, right? And when I actually went to a Trump rally in Minnesota, I just learned that that wasn't the case at all.
Scott, welcome to 12 Geniuses.
Thanks so much. So happy to be on with you.
You're a curiosity expert. What does that mean?
For me, that's meant, spending the past couple of years really digging deeply into the research. What does it mean for us to be curious? How do we become curious? What does that do for us in our lives and our relationships? Much of that exploration has been at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, an academic center that translates research into language, articles, podcasts, stories that make sense to the general public. So that's been a big part of my curiosity sort of journey. And then the other part of that has been living it, not just doing, seeing the research and understanding it, but actually applying it and practicing it. A big part of that has been a 13-month road trip across the country, meeting people who are very different from me. They are, much older than me, much younger than me. They have voted for a presidential candidate that, I oppose. They are part of faith traditions that are very different from my own, come from different backgrounds. So yeah, I spent 13 months on the road really using the research-based strategies and practices to see if we could actually bridge our divides and if we could come back together and I could form relationships even though we vehemently disagree about many important political issues.
What does the research tell us about personal and professional benefits of being curious?
There's a lot of really interesting research about curiosity. Some of the baseline ones that I like to start with is just personally, what can it do for us? We know that curiosity helps us to strengthen the relationships that we have with others around us. It helps us to feel closer to people. It can create a sense of connection, a sense of warmth. So that's what we call social curiosity in the research. But it also has all of these well-being impacts as well. So we find that curious people are happier people. It makes sense, when I think about my elders who are, constantly engaged with the world. They're very active. They're in their 80s or 90s, and they're constantly learning. They're constantly staying connected to people. They tell me that's what keeps them alive. That's what keeps them going. And similarly, there's research to show that the higher levels of curiosity you have, the lower mortality rates you have, especially for older adults. So it quite literally adds to your lifespan. It's really a remarkable mindset and practice we don't talk about enough. And it reduces anxiety and fear. It can support us with, feeling closer to people who are very different from us. It reduces aggression. It helps us to navigate conflict. Like, there's so much research on curiosity and all the benefits it has for us.
And at work, I think from a leadership effectiveness perspective, it cultivates a sense of belonging among employees, greater employee engagement, innovation, psychological well-being, or psychological safety. There's a ton of different benefits at work as well, right?
Yeah, because when you're more curious, you might be looking at different unusual suspects and bringing them into the collaborative process and, thinking about problems in different ways that you can, in solving them in different ways. So curiosity really drives innovation and creativity. And also, like you said, because of these well-being impacts, it helps with, getting the right people through the door, retaining them, just helping people feel happier at work. And also, it's the 21st century skill that I think every leader needs to have, especially also in this world of what I call like cultural chaos or the era of incuriosity. There's a lot of what's happening outside of the walls of the office that are now seeping into the office, and many times for good reason. And leaders need to be equipped to handle those conversations and those tensions.
Part one of your book is called Curiosity is a Superpower. And you talked about some of the benefits of being curious, but I'm wondering why you feel that curiosity is a superpower.
Yeah, well, I'm also just like a Marvel geek, like a very, I love just superheroes and superpowers. And I used to be a kid and, I would draw superheroes on my composition book. So there's a little bit of like a nerd moment, a geek moment for me that I wanted to just like fit that in. But I also think that, superpowers are, abilities that do good for the world. That's something that we all have the capacity to have inside of ourselves in our lives. And it's really just about that journey, like a superhero goes through, of discovering it. We all need that Professor X, or we need, that book or that experience that reminds us or unlocks our ability. It helps us to see that, wow, we have this capacity inside of us that can really do good for ourselves, our lives, and for others around us. And I think curiosity is that superpower. It's, once people recognize, curiosity and the way that they've used it in the past and how it's made others feel or how it's made them feel, it's something that, people, want to strengthen and want to do more of that. And so, that's my sort of, geeky slash philosophical reason why I wanted to call it a superpower.
I just had a conversation with a real good friend. We've known each other for about 20 years, and we were talking about superpowers. And I was saying, in a rapidly changing world, trust is a superpower, relationships is a superpower, being curious is a superpower. And it's not just curiosity about other people. That's important, yes, but it's curiosity around trends and new technologies and things like that. Because if you turn your back to those trends, you get passed by. And so I am in complete agreement with you around this being a superpower, and that we all need it, and to get to know each other, to divide this. To bridge this political divide, and also to remain relevant in the workplace and in society.
Yeah, and I think that's the outward direction of curiosity, right? There's the three directions of curiosity. How do we get curious about others and the world around us, the trends, culture, narratives that are at play? That's super important. And I think that inward curiosity is also so important, especially for me as someone who often disassociated by using my curiosity towards others as a way to push away any curiosity towards myself, because that was really scary. It created a lot of fear and anxiety for me. I was like, if I keep the spotlight on other people, I never really have to focus on all that dark stuff and scary stuff that's inside of me. But once I started to work on that has brought me like great joy and a great understanding of other people too, who might be going through similar situations. So that inward curiosity is just as important as the outward. And there's also the third direction, which is the beyond. So how do we get curious about what's not in the physical realm?
You use this phrase, era of incuriosity. And I have two questions about that. When did this era start? And what does that term mean?
There's just so much incuriosity that's happening, towards one another. We are just, we're just totally incurious about people who have different views from us politically. And we like to be certain and stand on our own points of views and say, this group of people that votes in a different way from us, they are deranged, they're uneducated, they don't know what they're talking about. They're going to be the downfall of our entire country. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, that's a whole mass of people that you're talking about. And neither of us are just monolithic groups. There's a spectrum of what it means to be a Democrat or a Republican. And the other piece is just around incuriosity across other social divides, right? It's not just political. It's happening across generations. Okay, boomer, entitled millennials, there's all of this friction. And that's why I've been so excited by organizations like Cogenerate that are really bridging the generational divides. But yeah, you can basically look at any social area of society and find an immense amount of incuriosity and division, where people are refusing to turn towards people, and instead they believe that they know everything about someone or a group of people. They're unwilling to learn anything else, and that's that.
And do you think that this era started as a result of social media, or when do you think it started, and what do you think the cause is?
Well, social media definitely doesn't help. I'm not a social media expert, but my understanding of the research I've read is that it can, the way that the algorithm works, it tends to, prioritize content that's really inflammatory, that has a lot of engagement because it's, putting out really polarizing views, sort of the bubbles of information that are proliferated through social media. Of course, disinformation and misinformation, which is so prevalent right now. One of my big fears with AI, and that creates continued divides and continued incuriosity. But I think this existed, I know this existed long before social media. I mean, Incuriosity, happens whenever we encounter anything of difference. It might be, someone who is experiencing homelessness, who's unhoused, that we walk by with Incuriosity. It's seeing them as a problem that needs to be solved versus a person that, should be looked at with care and with compassion and with curiosity. That's what I've learned from another author, Kevin Adler, who just wrote a book, When We Walk By. So I think this has existed throughout time, but it's getting worse and worse, I would say. And because of things like social media and, Reuters Ipsos poll found after the 2016 presidential elections, which I think was another moment of friction for our country in the United States. I would say Brexit for the UK. There's all of these sort of moments of rupture that have happened across the world. For us, I think the 2016 election was a big one. And 1 in 6 ended some kind of relationship because of the presidential election. 1 in 6.
What?
That is so many people to end some kind of a relationship,
a friendship,
because of the
a romantic partnership. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. Reuters Ipsos poll. It's like a really powerful statistic, and that's a lot of fraying relationships that are happening at a large scale, and that we just can't continue to do that. We can't, if we continue to 1/6 here, 1/6 the next year, we're not going to have any relationships left to actually, have and enjoy. But also the relationships we have are going to look so homogenous. We're never going to learn about the experiences and the perspectives of other people who have walked or have gone through different lives than us, who have experienced different things than us. And that's a really sad, but also a problematic world that we definitely cannot co-create. So we need to be curious.
What do you think in America without curiosity looks and feels like?
Today, I don't know.
I was hoping you weren't going to say that.
Yeah. Hop on social media. I will bet on your wall you will find dehumanization that is happening. And it makes sense. There is such suffering and injustice that's happening in our world. And I understand that there's so much emotion that comes with that, right? Like that is, as someone who loves psychology, like I understand that those emotions are valid when we have anger, when we have sadness, fear. These things will come up because we are human. When we see a geopolitical crisis happening abroad that maybe impacts our families, our communities, or those that we love. But to get it to a point where we're literally dehumanizing one another, calling each other savages, animals, saying that it's okay for people to be killed. I mean, that is just a horrific place to be in as a society. And so I just think about, in any sort of conflict or crisis, when you are curious towards folks and you create those relationships, like a real lived experience with someone, and you recognize like their humanity and who they are, and you have a fuller, unique picture of who they are. They're not just a caricature, a stereotype, you're not stigmatizing them in some way. You can really prevent the harm of, those that you now know, those that you love, and those who share that identity. I think about being queer, and the more and more that folks came out and shared that they were queer to their families, to friends, the more and more people who knew someone who was a part of the LGBT community. And when you know folks, even through a parasocial relationship, like on TV or film, the more you know someone and are curious towards them and see, wow, like, yes, they, love in a different way than I do, but they are still human and deserving of the same rights and should be liberated from the oppression that they're experiencing. That is when we get to, the kind of justice and the kind of liberation that I'm really excited about. And that's really powered by curiosity. That's powered by us understanding real people and their real experiences, even when it means that our curiosity can feel unsettling or uncomfortable to us because of what we're hearing. But it's important for us to hear that, again, so long as there's those boundaries and that consent and all of that that's happening as well.
We're living in this era of incuriosity. How do we overcome it?
I've been a runner for almost 20 years. When I was first learning how to run, it was so helpful for me to have, someone that gave me specific exercises or types of runs to do. Do a hill this day, do a short run this way, a long distance this day. and to recognize that it's a conditioning and that I'll get stronger and better and faster, over time. It takes time and it takes practice, and I have to dedicate my time to it. And that when I do that, I actually, many months or many years later can actually run that half marathon or run that marathon, right? And so I think the same is true for curiosity. Sometimes when people hear my story of being progressive and queer and Asian American and being truthful about that and going to a Trump rally like in Minnesota, to them that feels like a marathon and they're a new runner. And I'm saying, no, I don't expect you to go to the opposing political rally as your first step in this journey, a long journey of getting deeply curious. You can really start in small ways. Remember the science of habit formation, that what's the thing you can do today for 5 to 10 minutes that's easy and that's something that's more likely for you to do on a daily basis that gets you into that journey of curiosity. That might be asking a little bit of a deeper question to a loved one, in your family. That might be taking a 5 to 10 minute curiosity walk, outside and really just being in tune with all of your senses of the environment that's around you. And it's just making you not only physically healthier, but mentally more sound. The same is true for curiosity. We actually know when we put people under fMRIs, Matthias Gruber and other researchers have found that we release dopamine when we are curious. And that's like the happy hormone that we release when we eat a tasty meal or we have sex. So, the same is true for curiosity. So know that even if you have a little bit of that friction, when you actually get curious towards someone or towards yourself in these small ways, it can be an enjoyable process that makes you feel good. It makes you feel healthier. It makes you feel more active and engaged with the world. And it doesn't have to be this like really big thing either.
To me, the dive model is that framework for this is your calendar, your running calendar, to go back to your I want to run a marathon and I've never done this before. The dive model really helps you understand what you need to do. And it's the 3-mile run the first month, and then it gets you to the 6-mile run. So you kind of build up to it through the dive model. And I'd love for you to just walk us through quickly what is included in that model.
So DIVE is an acronym, DIVE. It stands for the 4 core muscles that we need to exercise to practice deep curiosity. So D stands for detach, which is how do we let go of our ABCs, assumptions, biases, certainty. This is the idea that we live in this culture that rewards answers more than we reward questions. In fact, we can actually have consequences or punishments for questions and exploration. And this is a culture that also pushes us to be certain about things all the time. We want to be certain about our point of view. We want to seem certain to others, when actually the research shows that certainty can lead to arrogance and make you less likable. So practicing more intellectual humility and curiosity can actually help you to build stronger, connections, be more attractive to others, be more likable, more communal, more friendly. I is intend, which is how do you create the mindset and the setting for deep curiosity. So that's about when you're going to have a deeply curious conversation with a coworker or with, someone in your family, are you thinking about the questions that you're going to ask? Are you, have you ate, have you slept well before you have that conversation? What's the mindset going in? And are you going to be like a professional athlete and actually mentally rehearse what that conversation is going to look like so you have the best chance of improving your performance? And then there's setting, which is what's the physical setting that you're in to be curious with others in. There's a difference between having a conversation on a really busy, chaotic subway ride than, in your home around the dinner table where there's this intention and phones are put away. V is value. How do you see the dignity of the person you're being curious with, which includes yourself? This is a lot of what we talked about, so I won't go into too much detail here, but this is about you have to start from a place of common humanity and not dehumanize people in order to actually get curious about them. The minute you dehumanize them, you're not going to be interested in learning about them because they are less than you or they're othered or they're the them. And then the last is E, which is embrace. How do you welcome the hard times in your life? Because when we push away the hard times or we don't fully engage with them, whether it's us losing someone that we really love or we're going through the grief process right now of currently losing someone that we love, heartbreak, losing our job, struggling with, a diagnosis of some kind in our own health, that those are all things that we can sometimes push away with incuriosity, but we lose learning so much about ourselves and others. And curiosity can actually be helpful for us in those moments. We can ask questions like, who in my community or in my network can I lean on, to get support during this time? What are the ways that I can show up for myself so that I can best show up for the people that I love? How do I really acknowledge, even the negative emotions that I or others are feeling through this really hard experience? All of that really, really helps and gives us tremendous insight and growth for our lives. So DIVE is a dive motto. And there's all these exercises in the book on how do you practice that in a way that's like really fun and engaging. And that's kind of the heartbeat of the book.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot over the past few years, even since I've started this project, is what people know. And it's not knowledge and facts and things like that, but I know this person is this way or that person is that way. And that really is your assumptions, biases, and certainties, what you call the ABCs. And I just had a question around self-awareness, because I don't think most people really know what they assume or what their biases are or what their certainties are. And, how do we build that self-awareness or step back and try to understand what we might be assuming or what our biases are or certainties?
It's a must, right? That we have to practice over and over again. I have this one practice in that section called Back That Ass Up. Ass is short for assumption. And it's also a really popular, hip hop song, which I love to dance to. But also, Back That Ass Up is like memorable. It's like a great way to remember, if I have this assumption, ass is short for assumption. If I have this assumption, how do I actually back it up? How do I pressure test it? How do I understand if this is real or not? So for example, right, when I was before I went to that Trump rally, I had all these assumptions about who a Trump voter was because I didn't really, understand them in a deeply human lived way. I thought they were uneducated, sort of were, mostly in rural places. I had all these sort of stereotypes, right? And when I actually went to a Trump rally in Minnesota, I just learned that wasn't the case at all, that there are many folks who are educated, even have advanced degrees, are humanitarian, many folks who are totally okay with me being queer, folks who even believed in climate change, which I didn't think was a thing. And then I actually looked up research that, a majority of Americans believe in climate change. And so we might just use different language, they might use conservation, I might use climate change, but we believe in what's happening to, man-caused, planetary effects and how that impacts our day-to-day. But so I had all these really interesting and rich conversations with folks that I didn't normally expect I would have, especially when I watched the media, like Jordan Klepper, is that his name? The comedian that goes to different Trump rallies. And I don't know, I just feel like a lot of that is what I call in the book predatory curiosity.
I agree.
It looks like curiosity. They're asking questions. And then there's like this gotcha moment, and it's to make people look stupid, like they don't know what they're talking about. And, in any political party, there are going to be people who are uninformed. I mean, just in any society, there are going to be people who are uninformed, have a lot to learn and get curious about. And yes, some of those views can be very problematic and also lead to real consequences for real people. I'm not denying that. But I don't think it helps our cause or helps people when we do efforts like that to, get this gotcha moment, to make people feel like a whole group of people to look like they're dumb and uneducated and out of touch.
I'm curious if you have any words of advice or caution for someone whose identity is strongly linked to their political beliefs. So I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, or I'm a Republican, and this is who I am. What words of caution might you have for those people?
Well, first, I just have like validation. I mean, I totally understand that we feel really strongly about our different identities and ideologies. That makes sense, especially in the culture we're in. And I think it's important for us to have a sense of identity and to move through the world in that way. So, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with people, having, particular identities and feeling strongly about them. But if our identities start to infringe on the health and happiness and security of other people, the rights of other people, starts to create injustice in some way, because our view is the only view that matters, or our identity is the only identity that matters. And we will go to no end to make sure that that's the case. that's where it starts to get problematic. And that's where I would put the caution. So, I personally don't see anything wrong with anyone being strongly, fiercely, excited and vocal about their identities, but just don't, I would really worry if that meant, erasing, dismissing, sort of pushing other people away, dismissing other people. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's even an invitation for people to understand you in a deeper way either. So
the 2024 presidential election and federal election is less than a year away. What advice would you give people navigating political or contentious conversations as we lead up to that election?
When you're learning about, how do I want to vote in this election, stay curious, stay really open-minded and open-hearted. Try to talk to, people or engage in news and organizations that do work on many different, topic areas that are related to, the vote that you're about to have. Learn about the candidates, get curious about them, talk to people in your own communities, and just get engaged and active in that way. And then the other piece is, we're probably going to have a lot of family reunion, dinner conversations, PTA chats with the neighbor next to you that might, involve politics because it's going to be on everybody's front of mind. And so to just remember, to stay in that place of curiosity, especially if maintaining that strong connection is important to you and you don't want to be that statistic of the 1 in 6 that ended a relationship as a result of the 2016 elections. I would say, stay curious so that you can stay connected to one another, and know that you being curious towards someone else will inspire likely for them to be curious about you and to learn about your own, values, beliefs, stories, what's important for you as well. And then the last and really important thing I would say is that curiosity and power are very directly related. The direction of curiosity matters. So if you are coming from a social group that has more social power, where your stories are more often heard in culture, on the news, in your narrative, then you are the person that needs to be curious more often. That is what the research shows, that will lead to everybody that you interact with feeling a sense of closeness and a sense of deeper connection to you and to them, is if you have more social power because your stories are more heard in a workplace, in the news, in the family, wherever, you should be the one being more curious. And vice versa, if you come from a group with less social power and your stories aren't often heard in culture or in the dominant narrative, it's more important for you to perspective give, to share your story, to share your voice. It's really important for people to be curious towards you and to hear what you have to say, and the experiences that you've had. And that's research done by folks like Emilio Bruno and other really wonderful researchers who have explored that topic. But yeah, power and curiosity are linked. So, I would also say that as a recommendation for folks in 2024.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was something that I wanted to ask you about. And it's so important that people understand that in the workplace, in our personal lives, everywhere.
Yep.
You embarked on this incredible 4,500-mile journey across the United States. And I'm curious to know, of course, because we're talking about curiosity here, what did you learn about what connects Americans regardless of our political views?
What I learned on my, 13-month voyage is that we all experience immense pain. We all do not like the experience of being othered and ostracized in some way or unheard. And in many ways, what that boils down to is people feel devalued when they are turned away from and when people are incurious towards them, whether that's their sibling who's doing it, or whether that's, their boss that's doing it, or, the greater society they feel is doing it. And so I just learned that we all actually love curiosity. We love it when people are curious about us and what we think and what we believe. It feels good for us to be curious towards other people. And that's something we share. We all have this, again, superpower for curiosity. So I would just remember that, when you're, going off in your life and you're, working or in your families or, picking up the groceries or whatever it is, every person you interact with has this incredible story that, I hope that you will be curious about, and not that you deserve it, that you will hopefully one day earn it through building trust in a relationship. And that when you're courageous and you ask that question, that question that's a little bit deeper than what you would normally ask, you might get into a conversation or even a relationship that's really meaningful to you that you otherwise wouldn't have had you not. So, that's, I think, a beautiful thing that we share. So stay curious and recognize the curiosity of others. And I think your life will feel a lot lighter and more meaningful.
What's the most profound way that 13-month trip changed you?
I think it got me more deeply spiritual. It made me more connected to the divine. It made me realize that the work that we all are doing, from my perspective, is work of the spirit of the soul. It's to, really undo hate, undo violence, undo suffering, and to, really move towards a place that I think is much more divine and much more peaceful, much more loving, and much more connected. And so I've learned a lot since then about different faith traditions and spiritual rituals, and I'm exploring my own spirituality again, which is a big thing, especially for someone who's queer, who grew up with a lot of self-hatred and a lot of shame because of religious dominant narratives that made me feel that way because I'm queer. And so that feels exciting for me to, re-engage with, the great beyond. So that was a huge transformation for me on the trip. And I think it's because I was literally like in conversation and touched by so many people who are so different. And I recognized, wow, there has to be something deeper that interconnects us all. I just felt it in this embodied way, when I actually got out there and met people. Yeah.
Scott, you're so energetic and you seem so optimistic. And I'm curious, what fills you with that sense of optimism?
Yeah, and I had to learn, by the way, not to be toxically positive or optimistic, because that's really problematic and harmful too. Seriously, when folks have negative reactions or are talking about suffering or talking about things that are going wrong, sometimes my younger self would be like, no, everything's great. Like, let's be optimistic. We can, and that's not helpful. That is actually invalidating and me being incurious, right?
That's
so
true, yeah.
I think I have optimism with curiosity and also a deep comfort around acknowledging that when people are having negative experiences, and obviously I'm growing and that I'm not a perfect person, but I think a big part of it is, just what I think about curiosity, that, it's a life, it's not just love, right? Love is a verb, and how do we actually live out love is by being curious towards one another. So that's, curiosity is love in that way. But I also think curiosity is living and is staying alive. And so, I'm like, if I just stay curious, if I learn about people in the world and the experiences inside of me and outside of me, I just become more alive and active and engaged and more optimistic as a result. Like, it's when I become more incurious and I close myself off and I'm like, oh my God, we're doomed. There's like no way that we're going to like get past any of these big issues in society, because we are losing on many of them, like climate change, right? It's very scary. But the minute I become incurious and I seep into certainty, and I'm like, I, as this one individual, know exactly how the future is going to play out in the next 50 years because I'm all knowing. When I come from that place of incuriosity, I feel so dejected and so depleted, so hopeless. I do not feel optimistic. So curiosity actually is my fuel for optimism. It fills that reservoir of hope. And I just stay curious towards myself and towards others and towards the world around me and towards the divine. And I feel so energized and so optimistic as a result.
Scott, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being a genius.
Thanks, Don.